Good morning and welcome to our second panel, Slate Seminar second panel, Oral History and Genealogy. Thank you for those who stayed from the first session, and welcome to our new faces for this panel. So we'll go ahead and get started with that one. I'll begin with oral history, to be followed by a presentation from our genealogist, Elizabeth Drembus. So my name is Tonia Meredith. I'm the oral historian for the Bray School Lab, and I'll be discussing the Bray School Oral History Project. The project will include narrators and interviewers. The project will include narrators or interviewers from the descendant community, William and Mary, and Colonial Williamsburg. The purpose of the oral histories is to capture and preserve the legacy of the Bray School scholars through the descendant community, in addition to our partners at William and Mary and Colonial Williamsburg. The oral histories will be archived at Swim Library, Special Collections Research Center at William and Mary. The Bray School Lab, with the projects Genealogy and Oral History, the research, are under the Williamsburg Bray School Initiative. The statement that the two institutions have put forth, that it is a joint venture of William and Mary and the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. The Williamsburg Bray School Initiative will use the Bray School as a focal point for research, scholarship, and dialogue regarding the interconnected, often troubled legacy of race, religion, and education in Williamsburg and in America. Through its collaborative and innovative work, the William and Mary Bray School Lab promises to redefine the history of Williamsburg, Virginia, a place of national significance where the practice of slavery and democracy both clashed and coexisted for almost 2 centuries. And the photo that we see here is the Bray School being moved back on February 10th, 2023. So again, under the William and Mary Bray School Lab, we have Nicole Brown pictured on the left. She is our lab research assistant for the lab. In the middle is our genealogist, Elizabeth Drembus, and then on the right side is myself interviewing a member of the descendant community. So many of the questions that we have for our project is about descendancy. We have many people come and ask us, how do I know if I'm a descendant community member? So for this question, the Bray Lab relies on the definition of descendant community as spelled out in the rubric, Engaging with Descendant Communities in the Interpretation of Slavery in Museums at Historic Sites. This rubric was created by historians, scholars, museum workers, descendant community members, and teachers, including William and Mary's Dr. Michael Blakey and Dr. Sarah Bonarper, to assist museums with the very important step of including the descendant community in their planning and interpretation. So regarding descendant communities, the rubric reads, in its most fundamental form, a descendant community is a group of people whose ancestors were enslaved at a particular site, but it can transcend that limited definition. A descendant community can include those whose ancestors were enslaved not only at a particular site, but also throughout the surrounding region, reflecting the fact that family ties often cross plantation boundaries. And then a descendant community can also welcome those who feel connected to the work the institution is doing, whether or not they know of a genealogical connection. For those of you who were on the first panel, I had a oral history on the slide because for myself, I do not know of a genealogical connection to a Bray scholar, but I do know that I descend from the group of families that sent a student to the Bray School. So I feel connected to the work William and Mary is doing to tell a fuller story of 18th century Williamsburg, and therefore I identify as a descendant community member. In addition to the descendant community, the Oral History Project will include members of the Bray School Lab, including the genealogist who is doing the work to find descendants. Her interview captures the process of finding descendants, the challenges she encounters, and the work she is doing to educate the community about her work. It will also include the Bray Lab student thought partners, student volunteers who do research in the lab, including projects like the Standing in the Gap Project, the Student Voices Project, Adam and Fanny's World, and the Transcription Project. William and Mary values the thoughts of their students and include them as equal partners in helping to disseminate the story of the Bray School. We also have the We also have the Faculty Fellows, Strategic Culture Partnership Faculty Fellows, who also assist us in expanding research related to the William and Mary Bray School Lab and the larger Williamsburg Bray School Initiative related to African American culture and legacy in Williamsburg and the history of African American education and community engagement. The oral history project will also include the oral history of the lab graduate assistant Nicole Brown, whom some of you met earlier in the first panel. Her interview details the work she has done for the Bray School Lab, including the work she's done with the Student Thought Partners and the upcoming book project for the book she is co-editing with lab director Dr. Maureen Elgersman Lee, with contributions from the descendant community members. The book is titled The Williamsburg Bray School, The Descendants Speak, A Community Speaks to Its Past and Present. The other partners that will be in the oral history project will be partners from the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. The interviews will also include the perspectives of our partners, specifically the architectural preservationists, who are responsible for doing a structural investigation of the building, preparing the building for the very important move to the historic area back in February, and completing the restoration of the building for its opening in September of 2024. The archaeologists seen in this photo will give their experience and detail the findings of the archaeological dig done on the building's original site at Prince George and Boundary Street. The Foundation's historians will also inform the interpretation of the building when it opens in 2024. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but only an example of the individuals who will participate in the project. When it is finished, the interviews will be archived with Swim Library Special Collections Research Center with free access to the public. As outlined in the rubric, the Bray School will ensure that the community never has to pay to access its history. Also outlined in the rubric is the interpretation of the site. The rubric states that descendants should also be included in aspirational conversations about future site or interpretive planning and in active exhibition or program development. In the oral history interviews that I conduct, descendants are asked what they hope to see in the building when it opens in 2024. This information is being collected by the Bray School Lab and is being shared with our partners at Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. In addition to the oral history project, the lab hosted a series of oral history and genealogical workshops in partnership with Swim Library to assist community members creating their own oral history projects or genealogical projects. If you need assistance with an oral history project, you can reach out to me at the Bray School Lab, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have on oral history. And now I'll turn it over to Elizabeth Drembus, the genealogist. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I forgot about one more part. I have one more part. So for those in attendance today, you are going to get a preview of the oral history project that I have been working on. You are the first people that well, except for Elizabeth, the first people to see this compilation video.
Welcome, everyone. We're going to do a little talk about some genealogy, and for those of you who were in the session earlier this morning, we talked a little bit about Molly, and in this session we're going to talk about another Bray School scholar we've been researching, and that's Aggie. And for those of you who may have joined us on our Zoom session on Monday, this will be a bit of a repeat. For those of you who weren't there on Monday, this will be brand new information. So I am Elizabeth Drembus. I am the genealogist with the Bray School Lab. I like to always kind of remember why we are here and why we are doing this work. It is the students, those scholars. They are at the center of our work, and this is an example of the attendance list from 1762. It is the only list that we have that includes the ages of the children. They are the center of our work. They are what grounds us and reminds us of why we are here and doing this work. Also, we need to remember the teacher, Ann Wager. She is definitely a part of this story as well. We seek to know more about her. We are very fortunate that we have partners in this work. We have some community partners who are engaged in helping us learn a little bit more about the teacher and her genealogy. But in the lab right now, my focus is squarely on the students that attended the Williamsburg Bray School. So we'll talk a little bit about the methodology in this. And hold on just a second. I want to make sure. Yes, okay, we've skipped it. Okay, well, so okay, we've missed a slide. So I'm going to just explain that we do have partners in this work. My great partner, Tonia Meredith, and I work extremely closely because the genealogy will inform kind of who to interview as far as the oral history. The oral history findings that she's having informs my work and the direction that my genealogy and the research will take. So we are definitely in conversation with each other daily. We also are in amazing conversations with our descendant community partners, and without them, we would not be able to accomplish any of this. So our hats are definitely off to them. The other partners that we have is through our broader public engagement, through our Facebook posts, through our blog, and through our community workshops, through our student thought partners, as well as working with both of the local DAR chapters here in Williamsburg. The Williamsburg DAR chapter helped with research before I came on board, so I was able to then start from their research. We are also working with the Ann Wager DAR chapter, and they are starting to look at the genealogy of Ann Wager, the namesake of their chapter. So it's gone beyond just the partners in our lab. It's beyond the partners that we have at W&M Bray faculty, as well as the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, but we're really bringing in the descendants as well as the broader community here in Williamsburg and beyond. So it really is becoming quite the community effort. The impact of my work is to hopefully contribute in some small way to the comprehensive history as well as the legacies of the Bray School students, and build that local community of engagement around the Williamsburg Bray School history, and elevate civic engagement in these types of projects and in this work. So we'll talk a little bit about methodology and genealogy. I don't know if we have any genealogists in the room, amateur or professional or otherwise. So when we talk traditional genealogy, usually that means you start with yourself, and then you go to your parents' generation, and then your grandparents' generation. You start with what you know, and you work backwards in time. So that's traditional genealogy, whether that is for European Americans or African Americans. In this case, and in several other projects around the country, we're starting with a list of names, and we're going forward. So we're really calling this reverse genealogy. We're starting with names, and then we're trying to figure out their children, and then their grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren. So that's a little bit different take on this. However, because we are working with the descendant community, we do have a group of people who are working from the present backward and are sharing that information with us. And as we are moving forward, we are hoping to close that gap, particularly with the Ashbys and the Jones family members. So it's a little bit of both. Mostly I'm spending my days on the reverse genealogy part of that. Types of records that we look at, particularly when we're doing African American genealogical research, or even formerly enslaved research. We need to look for the records that were created out of that legacy of slavery. So you think about wills and inventories where enslaved people would have been mentioned in property lists. We look at tax records where the enslaved are named, particularly in those early records in Virginia tax records. We look in court records. We look at manumission and emancipation records, and we also look at free Negro registers. So things that were put in place by law to serve one purpose, we are able to use those, look at those, and use them in ways that perhaps were not intended, but that's going to help us find those names, those elusive names that were erased from the archive. When I'm looking at the Bray School scholars, because most of the scholars going to the Williamsburg Bray School were enslaved, we are also tracing those white enslavers because they are going to be how we follow our Bray School scholars forward. So that means tracing and putting together the white family trees, and also knowing who their associates are, who is their family, who are their descendants, as well as who are their associates. And I'll tell you, the one thing about the Williamsburg enslavers that were sending scholars to the school, a lot of them were very high muckety-mucks, and a lot of them are related to each other. So I have a feeling that I have family trees stretching on my walls in the office, and I just imagine that in a few years it's going to show how they're all completely interrelated and married to each other. So we'll get there. So let's go ahead and start with Aggie. So Aggie, what we started with in March was that Aggie was named in the Bray School attendance list in 1762. And we knew that she was approximately 7 years old and that her enslaver was Peyton Randolph. And that's what we knew at that point. So there started the journey. So for me, we start with the Randolph family members. We start with Peyton Randolph and then his wife, Betty Randolph, and their records and the records that they produced. And that includes wills and inventories. We're going to see some glimpses of those records. We needed to create the family tree of the Randolphs. And the reason we also needed to include the Harrison family was because Betty Randolph was a daughter of Benjamin Harrison. So all of a sudden you have two very, very prominent Virginia families. You also have two families that have extensive family trees. So keeping all the Randolphs and all the Harrisons straight and knowing that Betty was not the only Randolph that married into the Harrison family, we had to, we really pulled this family together. And especially when we look at the Harrison family tree, right now it stretches about 11 pages long across the wall. So unfortunately, I cannot get it into a visual for our talk. So once we create the family tree, then we start searching the records both online and in person. And this is important because not everything is digitized and on Family Search. Not everything is on Ancestry. It means going to the library. It means going to places like SWEM, special collections. It means going to Rockefeller Library, using those records that are available locally, going to local history libraries. And so definitely been doing both online as well as in-person research. And it is obviously much easier than if we had been doing this about 20 years ago when things were not nearly as prevalent online. So my hat's off to all the folks that have digitized and photographed and made things available. And I would be remiss if I also didn't mention the Library of Virginia, because it is an amazing source here in the state of Virginia. Not only is it the state library, but it also holds the state archives. So it's just a great place to visit, and the staff is wonderful, and I've been able to research some Harrison family records there as well. But not only are we diving into the records, because I don't know about you, but for me, I need a sense of place. And so we also visit the Randolph House in Colonial Williamsburg. And through our partners with the DAR, we took a field trip to Berkeley Plantation to walk on those spaces that Aggie would have walked and her family would have been, because, again, it centers us and it grounds me to remember why we're doing this work, to bring those stories out. And also, it just, when I get frustrated that things are not written down as easily or the records aren't as easily found, it reminds me of why I'm doing this work and kind of reinvigorates me to do that. So I'm going to walk you through what we have, what we've uncovered so far. So we start with a photograph of the back of the Peyton Randolph household, because this is where Aggie and her family would have been. And so the first mention of Aggie comes in Peyton Randolph's will. And he writes his will in 1774. And he says, "I give to my said wife also little Aggie and her children." So at this point, in 1774, Bray School Aggie would have been approximately 19 years old enough certainly to have had children. We know that there's also a mention of a great Aggie and her children. So we did have to kind of look at how did we know that little Aggie was the Bray School scholar and not great Aggie. And there are records that helped us, and I'm going to show you an image of that a little bit later on in the Harrison family records, that gave us a way in to understand her age and her birth that would have lined up to prove that little Aggie was the Bray School scholar. But before we were able to do that, I did have to trace both great Aggie and little Aggie and their children through the records, just to see and to make sure that we were dealing with the right Aggie. Peyton Randolph died in 1775, and an inventory was done at all of his properties. He had property in Williamsburg, he had property in Charlotte County, he had property in James City County and York County as well. This was the list of enslaved people in his household from Williamsburg. Since we know that little Aggie went to the Bray School, we focused on certainly his will mentioning little Aggie, and then she was appearing in this inventory. And so a close-up reveals little Aggie is listed in the inventory in his household. At this point, there are two names following hers, Kitty and Betsy, and those will be significant, although we didn't know it at the time when we were first looking at the inventory, but we have since come to realize that Kitty and Betsy were little Aggie's daughters. The way we know that is when Betty Randolph writes her will in 1780, she gives to her nephew, Benjamin Harrison, a mulatto woman called Little Aggie, her daughter Betsy, and her son Nathan. So all of a sudden, we're putting this family back together again through the records. And we have a bit of a description of little Aggie. We don't know who her parentage is. We've not been able to identify a mother or a father yet. The historian in Charles City County, where the Harrison family is, has a theory about who her mother might be. It might be a woman by the name of Aggie. And it's not too much of a stretch to think that if the Harrisons and the Randolphs are naming their children after their mothers and grandmothers, that the enslaved families wouldn't do the same thing. There's not much beyond their culture, their language, and their experience to pass down to their children if they are not allowed to have any property. So why wouldn't they also pass their name down along as well? But again, right now it is certainly a theory. It's not supported in documentation, but it is something to certainly consider as we think about them in the records and we think about them in their lives. So back to Betty Randolph. She writes her will in 1780. Also, later in her will, she mentions another girl, a girl named Kitty, the daughter of little Aggie. So now all of a sudden we've got three children for Aggie. And by 1780, Bray School Aggie would have been approximately 25 years old, so absolutely biologically possible to have these children. Kitty is not going to be bequeathed to Betty Randolph's nephew, Benjamin Harrison. Kitty's going to be separated from her mother and her sister and brother, and is bequeathed to an Elizabeth Harrison, another niece. Now, Peyton Randolph and Betty Randolph had no children that we know of. There are no children of theirs named in the record. So it was all nieces and nephews and brothers and sisters. So that's why kind of really going through the family tree and mapping out this Harrison family tree became so important so we could figure out where everybody was. And the thing about Elizabeth Harrison, the niece, and sometimes she's referred to in the will as Elizabeth Harrison, who lives with me. Betty Randolph has 3 nieces named Elizabeth Harrison. So we've had to figure out which one it is. We've almost narrowed it down. We think that there was an Elizabeth who was the daughter of Henry Harrison. There was an Elizabeth who was the daughter of Charles Harrison, both who would have been not young, because there is a 5-year-old Elizabeth Harrison, and we don't believe that that would be the Elizabeth Harrison that Kitty would have gone to, because not only was Betty Randolph giving Kitty, an enslaved young girl, to her niece, she was also giving all of her wearing apparel. She was giving 500 pounds of money. So why would you give that to a 5-year-old? So we're narrowing it down to these 2 Elizabeth Harrison nieces who would have been somewhere between 18 and 22 years old. So more on that to come as we dig a little bit deeper into the records, but I wanted to just spend a little time on Kitty. So then the research takes us to Berkeley Plantation in Charles City County. And on our field trip there, we were able to see the reconstructed slave cabins on the grounds. We know that Betty Randolph was very specific in her bequest of Aggie and Betsy and Nathan, that they were to go to her nephew, Benjamin Harrison of Berkeley. So that also led us to know that this is where Aggie would have been. What's interesting, though, is she was bequeathed to her nephew, Benjamin Harrison. Now, that Benjamin Harrison would have been Benjamin Harrison VI. And I know I'm getting way in the weeds here, but it's important to also understand that these families would have kind of moved enslaved people around between family members. And what's odd is we never see Aggie with Benjamin Harrison VI. And what we understand from the historians and the managers at Berkeley is that there was some kind of father-son, not squabbling necessarily, but just some interplay between those two, where Benjamin Harrison V was not real sure he was ready to turn over a lot of stuff to his son. So Benjamin Harrison V, who happens to have served as governor of the state of Virginia from 1783 to 84, about this time when Betty Randolph dies in 83, what we end up seeing, though, is in Benjamin Harrison's tax record in 83, in Richmond, is where we find Aggie in the governor's household. So here we have movement of Aggie from Williamsburg to Berkeley and now to Richmond. And then when he is no longer governor in 1784, Aggie shows up again in Benjamin Harrison Sr.'s tax list. And at this point, we have two Aggies in this list. And this is why the historian thinks that one may be older and one may be our Aggie from the Bray School. And then, when Benjamin Harrison V dies, an inventory is done of his estate. An Aggie and a child, a 5-week-old child, is listed. Aggie's listed as infirm, but she's also listed as 36 years old in 1791. In 1791 minus, or 36 rather, 1791 minus 36 gives us 1755. And in 1762, Aggie, who is attending the Bray School, would be 7 years old. So at that we think we've got the right Aggie. Unfortunately, this is about where we lose Aggie, and I have so many questions and where we go next. But first, we've been able to reconstruct Aggie's tree this far. We hope to build on that in the next few months. I've gotten a few clues on Kitty, and so stay tuned. But again, for these records and the resources that we check, for each enslaver that we encounter, all of these records have to be looked at, because we never know where we're going to find any mention of the people that we're looking for. And so it is a little painstaking, it is a little laborious, and I love it. I'm pretty nerdy when it comes to these kinds of things, so I love it. And it's definitely a puzzle, and it's a puzzle that I am happy to be a part of for sure. So next steps, where are we going next? I'd love to be able to answer the question, why is Aggie not with Benjamin Harrison VI's will or inventory? What happens after Benjamin V dies? Where does she go? What happens? Unfortunately, what we learned at Berkeley was that during the Revolutionary War, when Benedict Arnold was coming back down the James River, burning plantation after plantation, he came to Benjamin Harrison's house, was very upset that he was not there, had been warned to get out, and threw all of Benjamin Harrison's belongings on the front yard and burned everything in just anger and retaliation. So we were pretty sure that some plantation records, house ledgers, account books would have been burned at that point. The manager says that there's nothing that exists still from Benjamin Harrison's household. Now, that doesn't explain what happened after 1784 up until 1791, so we're still searching for those records as well. We only see Aggie with the Harrison household, so we don't see Kitty, Nathan, or Betsy after 1783 just yet. There's some talk about whether or not Betsy may have been morphed into a Betty that's in the list. It's not too much of a stretch to think that the names would have been changed, or the handwriting would have kind of made it look, one way or another. So really need to dive a little bit more into that. And we're still determining, I'm pretty close on determining which Elizabeth Harrison did Kitty go. So those are the questions I'm left with at this point in the research, but we will stay tuned again. So What we do have, and I mentioned this in the earlier panel, is that we have started a monthly Zoom series called Bray School Stories. And each month we're going to gather on Zoom, and I'll be able to share a little bit about the research that we're finding on one particular scholar. This past Monday, we talked about Aggie. So you just saw what we just talked about on Monday. So. What's coming up next in November is we're going to be looking at Molly and see where Molly from the Prentice household, where the research has taken us. But there are ways to definitely stay in touch with us. This is the email address at the Bray School Lab. We also have an Instagram page and Facebook page that our educational technician Grace Helmick kind of mans and does a beautiful job with to show all of our activities. So I hope you engage with us and kind of keep following where the research is taking. And that's really the end of my kind of presentations. But we are happy to answer lots of questions. So thank you. It could be, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's not gloss over that. Absolutely, it could be. Peyton and Betty Randolph never mentioned any children of their, white biological children. We do know from another Bray School scholar, Isaac B., his father was a free black man, and his mother was an indentured white woman. So we don't know Aggie's parentage, whether it's a Randolph family member. We don't know whether a grandparent could have, or that mixed race could have happened in an earlier generation. We don't know, unfortunately. The records don't tell us, but certainly. Okay, and you absolutely.
Go ahead. Aggie have been Aggie's mother?
Definitely could be. Could be.
You don't have any evidence one way or the other.
Not yet. No, we don't. Not yet, unfortunately.
And she's identified as mulatto, Little Aggie, right?
Little Aggie is, yes.
So that would imply, obviously.
We have to be. We could, yes, absolutely, and absolutely. And I will say we need to be a little cautious with great and little, because that could mean older and younger. It could be the first Aggie that was in the household, and then little Aggie came in second. We have two at the Bray School from two different households. We also see Aggies listed in the Bruton Parish Register, so we definitely have, definitely Aggie, Agnes, very common. Yep. Okay, we had lots of hands. Who do you see? Okay. Do you want to take? I have not found. We haven't found anything definitive yet. I do know that Isaac B.'s father was not John Blair. I know that because his father, John Rawlinson, or sometimes he goes by John Insco, and sometimes he goes by John B. It's all of those things. But go ahead.
So that's actually something that I identified when I came to the project. That was my first thought, is that these were the children of the enslavers. No, we don't have any way to prove that. But I know from the scholarship that it was common for enslavers, especially if that child was going to be willed to a child as a body servant or woman servant, man servant, that they be educated also. And then I know you were in the morning session, so you saw the excerpt that I put of the oral history on my family, and that definitely, yes, that he fathered children, one plantation, he and his wife separated because of all of and that was just an oral tradition, but we know that we have to give that at some point, credence, right? But so yes, that is a consideration that the research has been leading us to. We've spoken with another historian at Charles City County about that, and that is her understanding as well, is that, we can't sit here and not think that the Thomas Jefferson, Sally, that it's an anomaly. It's not. That was common in that time period, so it's a consideration.
It's a great question. It's a fantastic suggestion, and I do need to look into those. Yes, so they're on my list of next records to dive into. So, and are those are all held at SWEM as well, or? Really good point. And we are due back to go to back to Berkeley, and we should talk to Judith and see, if she has some information on who the physicians in that area at that time would have been. Right. That's a really, thank you. Yeah, that's great.
And to the gentleman in the blue, just real quick, there is another historian that touches on it just a little bit, Jennifer Ost. She does note in her work that disproportionate number of the children that attended the Bray were of mixed race. So that may be another resource that you might want to look at as well.
So I'll talk a little bit about that. So we will not be collecting DNA. That was something we decided very early on. Sometimes when institutions collect that material, not good things happen.
Yeah, I understand
So
that.
we decided early on that we would not be collecting that. Now, what I will say is that when we've talked with some of the descendant community members, some have shared not only their family trees that they have on Ancestry or Family Search, but they're also sharing those DNA connections. And if they are sharing that information with us, we will certainly use that and put that in to guide the research. But we are not going to be collecting, holding, housing, anything like that. But Tonia's a great example of this. You want to speak on that a little
Right.
bit?
So were you in the first session this morning? Okay. So shortly after I arrived at the Bray School Lab, I started looking into my family's ancestry because when I came to Williamsburg, I noticed a lot of familiar names that I knew were in my family. And then I showed an oral history report from my family that we were descendants of the Armistead family. And so, and I went with that because oral history should be put on equal footing with any other type of resources. And the rubric that I mentioned earlier today, engaging with descendant communities, it states that it be put on equal footing when possible. But further research, I decided to add my DNA to Ancestry. And in that process, I did run into a person who also shared Armistead DNA. And so I actually met her. She's from Nashville, but she came to Hampton Roads for a convention, and we met at the Art Museum and shared our records. But so DNA has confirmed, not that I needed that too, because my family's word is good enough for me, but it did confirm that I am an Armistead, yes.
What I've been trying to do, and it's so odd to me, having done African American research and genealogical research as long as I have, it's so odd to me that it is the free families that I'm having the most trouble with, which I did not expect. And what we have is the Ashby children who went to the Bray School, and then we lose, and we know who their parents are. We lose track of them after the Bray School records. And I have been pulling any Ashby name out of the Williamsburg tax records, James City County tax records, York County tax records, starting in 1793. But I still have that gap from the 1760s to connecting any of those three Ashby children starting with 1793 and then forward. Wonderful, because I've got so many Ashbys in the tax records, and I have, like in the 1833 and 1834, the free registers list Ashbys, but I haven't been able to figure out how to connect them. And I've seen the Ashby Guest House at, yeah, so, but it's like all these little branches, but they're not connected. So if you have, we looked at the microfilm at Rockefeller Library because not only do they have the list of members, but they also then have the minutes of the meetings that were held. Now, those start as early as the 1860s, I think I saw in the microfilm, or are they earlier than that? So I was going to say that this is, so part of the Bray School initiative is that we are working in partnership with Colonial Williamsburg. And as they are reconstructing the Bray School building, they are looking to see if anything in the records are telling us what was in the school. What were the kids sitting on when they were at school? Do we have anything in the records? And this is where we are kind of at a little bit of a loss, that there's just not a lot of detail. The Peyton Randolph household with an inventory of all the items that he would have had in every room is brilliant. My experience, I'm going to speak from my experience has been that usually that specific relationship is not stated. It's usually caged in with love and affection for my servant so-and-so, for faithful servant, and so you kind of, you look at what is that a man or woman getting out of this? So it's the practice of, let me make sure, the practice of certainly keeping family members in the family makes sense to me. I've not seen specifically, or if I have, I've completely forgotten, but it's not a specific relationship, although actually that's not true. That's not true. There was somebody, I remember, it was probably later in the 1800s, where they were very specific that these are my children of this woman, and who was, either these are the children, these are my children with my enslaved woman or my servant named, and then they do acknowledge that. I'm kind of drawing a little bit of a blank, so it's going to depend, I think, on the person, their status maybe, the time period. So
It does happen.
it does. It does. So it's hard to make a generalization on that. But Tonia, do you have any? I don't. What?
No,
Because that's not.
I don't, right. If I've ever seen it, it wasn't in the 18th century. It may be late 19th century. I don't know if I've ever seen that.
Folks, this panel is scheduled to go until 12:30, but we're happy to stay and continue the conversation. If anyone has other questions, suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. But if things are kind of winding down. Oh, okay, great.